Okay, so the case study I looked at was young Chinese women in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And why I looked at them was because of this mass movement to modernize in China. They kind of changed their traditional values and became more modern, you could say, and women began to have different kind of rights and did different things. Okay, so just a brief background. This is information on China. The population, I think it was, the stats I looked at was 2011. It was roughly around 1.3 billion. And the main religions are Confucianism and Buddhism, which kind of plays a really big role later. And then the main occupations are agriculture and industry. The city I looked at in my paper was Shanghai. Only around 2% of the population even lives here, but it's really the big hub of the economic and culture center of China. And a third of them switched from agricultural jobs to industry. To give you background on their movement, as I said before, they, in the 1990s, opened their borders to international trade, which was a really big deal because China was very private and didn't like to share any information about themselves or had others come into it. And what really, it began, like foreign companies came over and began building their own companies there. So what they needed was a cheap labor force, and the reason why they chose China was because they didn't have any restrictions on labor. So they could have them work long, strenuous hours, but at the same time produce tons and tons and tons of products. And it helped meet their financial bottom line because they made a great deal of profit while keeping their labor costs down. So the main concept of filial piety, it's enhanced by both Buddhism and Confucianism. Basically, their main idea is that children are brought up knowing that they owe their parents a certain amount of debt. And what that means is that they have this knowledge that they have to work and support their parents the rest of their lives. The difference between men and women, though, however, men can get rid of that debt by just becoming a monk and being good to their parents, whereas women can never get rid of this debt. It's always going to be there because the women's level of a monk is not nearly as close as what it is for a man. So the main idea of modernization theory, which plays a big role, is that the country trying to modernize really needs to kind of alter their traditional values for more modern ones, because that's just a belief in it. But so China kind of had to alter their beliefs and kind of adopt the more modern ones. Gender division of labor. This means that the women brought up in China are brought up being taught tasks that are more feminized, which include like caring for the children, cleaning, cooking, whereas men are taught the hard labor, which is stuff with the farm, finding food and all that kind of stuff. So it plays a role in what women are expected to do rather than what they want to do. So my main idea was looking at the changing role of women. And what I examined was how they were before this modernization and how they were after. And before they're kind of kept at home with their families. They were cooking for their families, cleaning for their families. And then after they became more, you could say they had more freedoms. And they were able to move to the cities, which include Shanghai, and work in these factories and have some sort of independence, whereas before it was never even thought of. It wasn't a possibility. And the main reason why was because the sons were traveling overseas to Iran, to Iraq for jobs, because the jobs in the cities of China weren't paying nearly as much as what they wanted. And because they could get paid more, they left. So it left this really big open gap of labor for the women, and they were able to go and work, and the companies were happy because they could charge them nothing for labor. And they were willing to work the extreme hours because they felt that they needed to pay off their debt to their families. Like I said, it produced more freedom because they were able to go shopping, go see sights, and do all that, whereas if they were still stuck in those villages, they wouldn't have been able to do it. It was kind of a crazy thought. So, any questions? I talked really fast, I know. I'm a fast talker. No? So, yes?
There's been kind of a labor shift out of China. Is the same thing happening now where there's still a migration of women to cities like Shanghai?
There's still a consistent amount, but more in the present time, it's more because their husbands are moving to the city. So now they're traveling with the husbands, whereas before it was just them.
Okay, so if they're traveling with their husbands, are they still working in the city? Or is
Yes.
it just that the family?
No, sometimes they do work, yeah. Yeah, they still work in some of the factories. Yes.
So, I was wondering, since you're saying that kind of in earlier times, maybe prior to the country wanting to modernize, daughters wouldn't be leaving the home to work, they'd be working in the home. Is there any resistance on the part of family members or parents not wanting their daughters to go to the cities for employment?
They were torn because they wanted to keep their daughters at home because that's what they believed in, but they needed that extra income to bring in to help buy items to help their farms, help support just their daily needs because it's harder to make money just on their farms. So, any more questions? Yes.
Do you know any comparison of working hours compared to when they were working, doing agricultural or homework, compared to like when they were working in factories?
I mean, I would assume it was around the same, I mean, if not same, not if not more, because they could keep them there for 13 hours at a time, whereas if they're on the farms, they're with their family, and they would stop for the night at one point, whereas in the factories, they can keep them as long as they want. So they kind of, I think they worked more in the factories than in the farms, but that's just what I'm taking from it, so I'm not sure.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.